So if you follow me at all on social media, and I'll leave the link to my Blue Sky account in the description here, you know that I've been downsizing my comic book collection over the last few years. So in this video, I want to talk about why I'm downsizing, how I'm downsizing, and what the process is involved in downsizing my collection. And if you're thinking about doing the same thing, maybe you'll find some tips or some clues here that can help you do the same thing that I am. Hey everyone, it's Kevin. Welcome once again to Doc's Comics. If you've been following me at all on this channel, you know that I have a collection of about 5,000, and that includes my floppies, it includes trades, it includes slabs, and just about everything else that goes into my collection. You might consider that a small collection, you might consider that a big collection, and a lot of you have way more books than I do, and a lot of you have way fewer books than I do. But I decided not too long ago to try to downsize my collection just a little bit. I had probably 7,000 altogether, and over the years I've chipped away slowly but surely in creating more of a quality over quantity kind of collection. Now, to be perfectly fair, this is different for all of us. Some of you are perfectly happy having 25, 50,000 books in your collection and having boxes stacked to the ceiling. I just don't operate that way, unfortunately. It gets a little too cluttered, a little too unwieldy, just a little too big to manage and to go through. And it can be quite a burden. It can become work maintaining your collection. So my idea was to try to downsize it to a manageable level for me. There are plenty of you out there who are like, Freeman, you are crazy. Why are you doing this kind of stuff? Why would you willingly get rid of some of your books? And I get it. Some of y'all don't operate that way, and that's a perfectly fine way to do it. But what I want to do in this video is talk about the process involved in me downsizing my collection. I'm going to break it really up into three parts. First, I want to talk about why. Why did I decide to downsize it in the first place? After I address that, we'll get into the what. What is it that I've decided to get rid of, to move on, to sell, to shrink down in general? And then, of course, the third component is the how. What's the process involved in getting rid of your books to get to that manageable collection? So let's jump right into this. Again, before I delve too deeply into this, your mileage may vary. And what I've decided to do, you might think I'm just absolutely insane getting rid of my stuff. But there might be some of you out there who are just running out of space and you're looking for ways to downsize and you just need help with that first step to try to get there. So to address this, let's start first with the why question. Why have I decided to downsize my collection in the first place? Now, I suspect all of us go through some kind of downsize occasionally. A few years ago, well, more like 15, 20 years ago, I got rid of several thousand books just because I simply had too many, and stupidly just got rid of a lot of it without really taking into consideration what it was I was getting rid of and what kind of future ramifications that might have. We all have those kinds of regrets, so I'm not really going to address that. But for me, currently, pretty much post-COVID, right after the end of COVID started, is really when I started picking up my collecting. Then I realized, I got to a point where like I'm just getting too much stuff here. I'm getting out of control. I need to be a lot more precise in what it is that I get, and some stuff simply has to go. So the collection was just getting too unwieldy. It was too many boxes. Boxes are heavy. You're in a limited space. Shifting boxes around to look for stuff becomes difficult. Putting comics away becomes difficult. Shifting boxes because you have too much stuff and are adding new boxes to the collection really is a lot of work, and it can be kind of backbreaking depending upon how many boxes you have. So simply was just getting too big and too unwieldy for me to manage effectively. It also becomes more difficult the more books you get to keep track of things. Now, I know there's a lot of apps out there, and I utilize CLZ, and I use it all the time in managing my collection. But again, I get to that point, to that number, where it becomes much more difficult to determine if I have something, if I need something, if I have duplicates of things. And so getting it down to a manageable number, and manageable being in my head, was something that made a lot of sense. I already talked about moving and filing and storing, and that's one of the biggest burdens when it comes to having a large collection. Again, I was at a friend of mine's a couple of weeks ago, and he's got books everywhere, and I think his collection is fantastic. And I'd spend weeks going through that and looking at stuff and being amazed at the marvelous books that he has. But for me, I just can't handle that kind of collection. I'm also a little bit of a neat freak, of an OCD person, and so I like to have things neat and orderly and clean and stacked and looking organized. And again, the more books that you have, the more difficult it becomes to do that. I am a quality over quantity person. I have a lot of nice books. You've seen some of them on videos here, and I'm very proud of the collection that I have. But I did have a lot of stuff, and I'll get into this more with the what here in a few minutes that I thought were definitely cuttable books so that I could shrink the collection down to a size that I was happy with. And I'll say it again. Yeah, I know some of you think I'm nuts by doing this. You think I'm nuts by posting this video. And that's what makes comic book collecting such a fun hobby is that all of us do it differently. All of us have different ideas of what an ideal collection is. All of us have different ideas of what fun things to collect are. And so everybody does it differently, and that's what makes it so doggone cool. So that gets into the why a little bit for me. So after I decided it was time to cut books, after I decided what kind of a meaningful level of or amount of books I wanted to have became a reality in my head, the next question, and probably the hardest question that all of us have to face when going through some kind of downsize, is what is it that I want to get rid of? What is cuttable material and what is keepable material? And for me, the books in my collection fell into one of really four categories. Every individual comic that I had fell into one of four categories, two of which are fairly similar to one another. So if you want to combine them into one, that's perfectly fine. But the first thing that I decided upon was I don't really need books that are not terribly sentimental to me. And we all have sentimental books that we remember for our childhood, early collections that we pieced together, and whether we still have the originals or we've upgraded those books like I have. Um, Kind of the rule of thumb that I used was if I look at a book, can I remember anything about the story? Do I remember the significance? Do I understand what happened? Do I understand who the characters were that were involved? And if I don't have an answer to that, then those become books really aren't just that aren't sentimental to me and that I was just collecting for collecting's sake. And I am a completist, as you know. I have a lot of full runs. There are many full runs that I'm not going to touch, but there are some others that I decided it was time for them to go. So the first thing is just cutting a lot of filler that wasn't sentimental to me. Second thing, and this was probably the easiest chunk of books to cut, is that stuff that I had in multiple forms. There's a lot of books that I had and still have, honestly, that I have in floppies, I have in trades, I have in hardcovers, I have digitally. There's a lot of redundancy that honestly just takes up space. And if I'm only interested in reading the book and not as interested in collecting the book, then whittling that down to one or maybe two forms becomes a pretty obvious thing to do. I've got a lot of old books that are kind of expensive. I don't necessarily want to take them out of the bags and boards to read them. And so having a trade or a digital copy or a hardcover to read it makes it easier to do that. You know, I have a lot of these Marvel Masterworks, for example, that allows me to read books still, even if I don't have the floppies for them anymore. So a lot of stuff that you have, I bet, as well in multiple kinds of forms. You got to take that next step to kind of get rid of that redundancy in order to do that. Third, I got rid of a lot of stuff that isn't particularly valuable, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the redundancy, and it goes hand to hand with the sentimentality. Um, Many of us love dollar books, and I see posts every day on Facebook and on Blue Sky and other places where I'm on social media about people being so happy that they found a big sale where fill a long box for $50 or dollar books, and they buy hundreds of books to bulk up their collection. I think that's fantastic. I'm just not there anymore. Maybe I used to be, and that's one of the reasons I had a lot more books then than I do now. But I've gotten to the point where I'm wanting to cut a lot of that filler stuff that I was just buying to complete runs or maybe to try things out. And there's some series that I don't like, and that gets into the next one here in a minute. And a lot of this is tied to filler, as you will see. Um, so, like one series that I can use off the top of my head is Marvel 2-in-1. Marvel 2-in-1's 100 issues. I talked about Marvel 2-in-1 being a fairly inexpensive series to collect, and that's true. You can get a lot of these for a dollar or two each. But I do have a lot of the Marvel 2-in-1s, if I can find them here, in Marvel Masterworks form, particularly the later ones. And the later ones aren't worth a whole lot of money. They're relatively easy to find in high grade. They're cheap. And so I just decided to get rid of a lot of the later issues of Marvel 2-in-1 and instead utilize the trades, the hardcovers in this case, so that I can read them and enjoy them anytime that I want, but I don't have the bulk of the redundancy and I don't have the bulk of the filler in my collection. So I got rid of a lot of stuff that wasn't particularly valuable. The old J.M. DeMatteis and Kevin Maguire issues of Justice League from the late 1980s. It's the same thing. Great story, great read, just aren't that expensive, aren't that valuable, common to find. So I decided to cut singles of those and stick to the digital, in fact, on those. And then the last category that I'll mention that falls into this what is that all of us do this. I start a series, I start working on it, I fill some gaps, I read a few, and then I decide that that series simply isn't for me. And so instead of just holding on to them, what I tend to do is move them on. I'll sell them, I'll get rid of them. I'll talk a little bit about that in the how coming up here in a minute. But there are some things I start that I'm just not interested in finishing. Either I lose interest, I don't really care about the series a whole lot, or you just have that satisfaction of finally completing the run. You don't really want them anymore, and so you move them on to somebody else who might enjoy them more than you at that time. So that leads us to the how. How do you actually downsize your collection? I've hinted at a little bit of this already. One way that you can downsize is to convert your redundancy to one form. So you can get rid of all your trades and turn them into singles. You can get rid of all your singles and turn them into trades. You can get rid of either one of those and just read the books digitally. And a lot of the digital readers out there are really good, and you can get that full comic book experience other than the smell, which is one of my favorite parts. You can get rid of that. You can still have that reading experience without having the bulk of a bunch of hundreds of bags and boards or books on your shelf like you see behind me here. I did that with Marvel 2-in-1. I did that with later issues of Marvel Team Up. I did that with later issues of Defenders, all of which fall into this category that I mentioned earlier, that they're relatively common, they're not terribly expensive, and they aren't ridiculously sentimental to me. But what do you do when you get rid of them? Well, I sell a lot of my books on Whatnot. Although I haven't done a Whatnot show in a couple of weeks, I got rid of almost $1,000 or 1,000 books on Whatnot. And what I did is all the money that I ended up generating from my Whatnot sales, and it was several $1,000s worth, I ended up buying things that were on my want list. So I converted 1,000 books into like 100 books. Those books, of course, are a little harder to find, a little more expensive, fit into my permanent collection really nice. I got a lot of Strange Tales and Tales to Astonish and other harder to find series by simply selling some of this common stuff that I mentioned earlier. So it again, for me, it's converting from quantity into quality. You can give stuff away. I mean, I've given a lot of trades to local libraries that I'm not using anymore. I've given a lot of stuff to schools, little kids in the neighborhood who you might want to introduce to the idea of comics. Give them some kid-friendly stuff that they might enjoy. There are lots of ways to do it, and if you don't have that sentimental attachment to comics, it becomes relatively easy to move that stuff on, particularly if you take a little bit of satisfaction in knowing that other people are going to enjoy the stuff that you spend a lot of your time enjoying as well. And there's a little bit of satisfaction and fulfillment to that as well. So you can sell a lot of your books. You can sell them on Whatnot. You can take them to your local comic book store. You can try to sell them on eBay. You're not going to get as much money at your LCS, but it's a lot easier and you can get rid of a whole bunch at once. Whereas if you're selling on Whatnot or eBay, you got to itemize, you got to sell individual issues or small lots. And so there's a lot more work involved, even though you might get more money as a result of that. And if you don't have any problem giving away stuff that really doesn't have a whole lot of value, if you have friends who are in comics and maybe aren't collecting the same runs as you are, you can give them a nice stack of books and say, hey, check these out. Um, there is also satisfaction in that. So I know this isn't the most complete video at all, but I have been doing a lot of downsizing. It's a constant thing. As I buy more comics, I look for other things that I can get rid of. But I am almost to the point where there really isn't anything left in my collection that would be easy for me to cut. And whereas I was probably at 6,000 books total, I'm probably more at like 46, 4,700 items now. I've probably gotten rid of, I don't know, 15 long or 15 short boxes worth of books and a couple of shelves worth of stuff on the shelves that you see behind me. So it has become more manageable. Now you got to be careful. If you're literally trying to downsize, you can't sell 100 books and then turn around and buy 100 books because you really have a net zero when it comes to shrinking your collection. So you have to be careful about that. But that's all right. There is a lot of trial and error that's involved in this. There are some difficult decisions to make when it comes to things, but if you are interested in downsizing, hopefully you've learned a little bit from this video and maybe can take some of it to heart if you decide that you want to do that yourself. Anyway, that's all I've got. I hope you all enjoyed this show, and we will see you at the next one, whenever that happens to be. Y'all take care of yourselves.